Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We're going to do now the Maimer of Shabbos, Parshas Arye, Kedosheem, Yud Gimel Iyar, Hey Tov Shimem Hey, from exactly 40 years ago. This coming Shabbos will also have Arye Kedosheem, just that this year it's going to be on the 12th of Iyar. Everything will be one day off of the calendar of 40 years ago for this period coming up. Of course, the Maimer gives us strength and inspiration, as we'll see, as all the Mamorim do. Special flow of energy. Additionally, Billy Nader, just a little shopkeeping here. The Maimer of Lag Bo'imer, hopefully we'll do the first part of the Maimer still this week. And then the second part, we'll do it in two parts. It's a long Maimer of Lag Bo'imer, Tov Shimem Hey, 40 years ago. Veheeskadeeshtem, Veheyeesem, Kedosheem. The Parsha tells us in Kedosheem, the Kedosheem part of the Parsha, because it's a combined Parsha, and you shall sanctify yourselves, and you shall be, or you will be holy. And it's in the plural, because it's talking to all of us. Or maybe and the Rebbe the Yahrtzeit, the third Rebbe, brings in his Maimer, in his discourse that begins with these words, on this verse, that which the sages of blessed memory tell us in the tractate of Brachas. Just a quick note, if you're following in the bottom in the footnotes, there's a typo. So whereas it says for Ha'ora 3 it says Nun Ches, it really should be Nun Hey. It's on folio 55, not 58. And the Gemara says Al Posuk, and the verse is a quote from Yecheskel, Ezekiel, Hamizbeach Eitz Goimer, where the description of the temple and its vessels are being described. So it says the altar of wood, and the verse continues to give its dimensions. And at the end of the verse, Ezekiel says, "Vayidaber Elai ze hashulchan asher lifnei Havaya," and he spoke to me, saying, "This is the table which is before God." Now, just some background here. In prophecy of Yecheskel of the temple, this is the only vessel of the vessels that is discussed. The other vessels, like the menorah and what is actually called the shulchan, the candelabra and the table for the showbreads, is really not enumerated there. And this, even the altar, it doesn't speak about all of the specifics that would have to get covered, etc. But it says the dimensions, and then it says this is the table. So it's talking about, first it says Hamizbeach, the altar, then it says table. So the Gemara says, Kol zman shebeis hamikdash kayim mizbeach mechaper al Yisroel. As long as the holy temple was in existence, the altar atoned for Israel. V'achshov, and now, after the temple was destroyed, shulchani shel adam mechaper alav, the table of mankind atones for him. The Yeshlavayir kesher yonim. So the Rebbe says that we have to explain what is the connection here. And the Rebbe enumerates the pasuk Veheeskadeeshtem lein shulchani shel adam. Number one, to what does this verse have to do? This verse of you shall sanctify yourselves, with the idea of a person's table. And we can explain it al pi ma shomer azal bevrachas, according to another Gemara in Brachas, which this is on page 32. Hu v'gam ki beretayra pashashtena, that Chassidic also brings this passage, Veheeskadeeshtem, when it says that you shall sanctify yourselves, eilu mayim rishenim. This is the first water, meaning the water that you wash for bread before the meal. Veheyeesem Kedosheem, and you will be holy. Eilu mayim achreinim. This is the after water, the water that we wash over our fingertips at the end of the meal. Ani havayalek chulu, etc. Speaks there about the oil that you may use. And then it says, Ani havayalekechem zu bracha chulu. I am the Lord your God. That's a reference to the blessing. Because then we thank God for the food that He gave us. Move on. From this we understand Veheyeesem. So with this we understand that the ultimate of the table of man, the idea of the meal time and the meal that will take place at the table, is specifically the ultimate will come through one sanctifying oneself. The Veheeskadeeshtem, and you should make yourself holy. Veheyeesem Kedosheem, you'll be holy. And that'll happen through through washing, the first washing, the final washing, and also that also includes, the Rebbe adds here, not just the benching, but of course also the blessing before the food, and the blessing after the food. That sanctifies the whole event of the meal, all the eating process on that table. This is the connection with the holiness. Kedosheem to you, that you should be holy. The Pirush Rashi now, and Rashi explains what it says here in the verse, and you shall be holy. Rashi says, Perushim tihiyu min ha'arayis or min ha'aveda. You shall be separate. You shall separate yourselves from the illicit and relationships, and from transgression, from sin. Now, so how does that connect again to the mealtime? Because also the idea of eating when it's not done properly can also involve transgression and sin. Like the sages tell us. Like the sages tell us, that milik reise zanabi shechulu. They're sometimes just filling one's intestines, one's innards, can also be a sinful thing. And the context is really in the Gemara there. It's an interesting context in and of itself, where it says if you have an opportunity and somebody continuously gives something that's in the context of the sin of the golden calf, and Moses talking to God, and he says, you gave them all this gold when they left Egypt, and now they ended up making a calf. And there's a famous thing that it's like the analogy of the prince, that he's given everything he wants, and then his father makes him healthy, and he eats well, and then he dresses him up, and puts a little pouch of money around his neck, and he brings him to the brothel. And that's what the famous saying is, what should he? He shouldn't sin. He's all set up. You set him up. Today, in modern day psycho, whatever we say, set him up for failure. Set him up for the sin. So also, eating could also be, if it's not done with the right way, then it could have sinful consequences, whether it's not eating properly for the right purpose, or not eating food that is kosher, or not thanking God for the food, etc., etc. And therefore there has to be the proper, and I'm using the word here, separation, but the idea of holiness in general means that it's set aside for something, and that's what sanctification means. So perishus also means to separate oneself from what shouldn't be done. Quite simply. So now when it's the meal time, that's from, again, like this whole procedure. Washing before you eat, making the blessings, and after water, etc. Veheyeesem, Chassidic explains there in the Maimer, but now, of course, there's a deeper sense here. And the whole idea of the atonement that comes from the table of man, to understand that, so first we have to understand, how did the atonement come about with the altar? The Gabi Mizbeach Zal, regarding the altar, the sages teach us, this is a very It's quite interesting, like everything. Mizbeach, the word Mizbeach, which is altar in the Holy Tongue, also this is not an acronym. In Hebrew, we call it nutrikon, which really means, it's really a Greek word, but it means it's a word that sounds like other words, or from this word you can make other words, or it could be also an acronym. So, Mizbeach, Meziach, Gezedes, Umazin, Mechavev, Umechaper Avonis. All these things start with a mem, just like Mizbeach does. It moves aside decrees, bad decrees, and it satiates and it endears and it atones for sins. So the primary thing of the altar is the atonement. This we also have that which the Medrash says, and they bring here in the footnote also that this Medrash is also brought to explain the Gemara by the Maharsha. So the Medrash says, Mizbeach hu Rosh Teves, and here the Rebbe said this, that the word Mizbeach, the Medrash says, is an acronym of 4 things that the altar represents. Mem, Mechila, the Mem of Mizbeach means forgiveness or pardon. Zayin, Zechus, merit, starts with the letter Zayin. Beis, Beracha, blessing. Ches, Chayim, life. The Rosh HaTeva Mizbeach hu ha'ois mem. But the beginning of the letter Mizbeach is the letter mem. Hainu inyan ha'mechila shehi ha'kapora. This is the idea of forgiveness, which is atonement. Earlier, where the Gemara says, so the mem zayin is the same as meziach and mazin, right? The ches is mem ches, mechavev. So, but the only thing that's similar in mechaper and mizbeach is the mem. In these words that we had earlier that the Gemara says. The letter mem is for mizbeach, it's also for mechaper. And the Rebbe points out that when you bring about kapara brings mechila. Mechila again has 2 of the letters, just like all the other things has 2 of the letters. So just like the primary aspect of the altar is its atonement, similarly the person's table also brings about the atonement. To be a reunion, who now that Rebbe explains, and along the lines of the explanation of the Tzemach Tzedek in that Maimer, the general sense of the bringing the offerings on the altar, the point of it is serving God through refining, refining the world. And as is known, and Chassidic talks about this, that, and the Kabbalah, of course, the Mizbeach had 2 types of eating. Now, the word for eating, achila, also can mean consumption. So, but here you have aleph achilas hakeh and umabaylim. Now, the various korbanos had different rules who had to eat the offerings. Some of them were eaten only by the kohenim. Some of them were eaten by the owners, the one who brought it. Some of them weren't eaten at all. They were only eaten, or I shouldn't say they weren't eaten at all. They weren't eaten by the kohenim, the owners. They were only eaten by the altar. God ate them. So, the first 2, aleph achilas kenim ubaylim achilas adam. That's human being eating it. The Rebbe says something interesting here. It's more specifically speaking, the fact when the kohenim eat it, that's an in-between, a go-between, so to speak, an intermediary, so to speak, between the eating of the altar itself and the eating of the owners. So the kohen is specifically set aside, so that's on a special level. Everyone, elsewhere the Talmud says The Kohanim, they had to have doctors and this, they had to consume, even though they only had to eat a little piece of meat from every korban, even though there was a lot of them, but they sometimes ended up in busy season, they had no choice but to consume a lot of meat of the korban, even though they didn't have to eat the whole thing, etc. But that's not what the Rebbe is getting into, specifically that detail. The second type of consumption and eating is achilas mizbeach, the altar's eating. Achilas shelamayla, so to speak, the supernal consumption. Shalzen emar, that's what the verse refers to when it says, we read this on, and we say this in the prayer to prepare for the davening. We read the karbonis, the offerings, as karboni lach mili yishai, my offering, my bread for my fire offerings, my reach goyim reich nichoyach lashem, a pleasant scent for God. Nachas ruach l'fanei shamarti v'naseh l'tzoyni. And then it says pleasant. Pleasant also means that gives God the pleasure that I said something and my will was done. Movayer b'zeh, the Tzemach Tzedek explains shekeneged beis inyonim eila shemizbeach kipshutei yeshnem gamkin beis inyoni aveda b'shulchonei shel odom adem lemizbeach, corresponding to the two types of eating that there are with the altar, which is the human consumption and the supernal consumption. We have also the same two types of serving God in the table of mankind, which is similar to the altar. Veheyeesem misefer tiglas Yaakov. The Tzemach Tzedek brings in the Maimer there from a sefer which is called Tiglas Yaakov. Mechidushay Agad Maharsha, and from the Maharsha, his commentary on the Tractate Menachem, Shezeh Shulchan Shel Adam Doime Lemizbeach Hu Mitzad Beis Inyonim. Why is the table of mankind similar to Mizbeach? For two reasons, two things. Aleph, Mitzad Inyan Hatzdaka Shebeshulchan, very important piece here, the charity that is affiliated and connected to the table. Beis, Mitzad Inyan HaTeirah Shebeshulchan. And the second one is the Torah, which is associated with the table and the meal. Kidl Kamon, like the Rebbe says, we will explain. And these two ideas of charity and Torah correspond to the two consumptions of the altar, of the eating of the mankind and the eating of the supernal realm of God. So they're representing the mankind eating the offerings that on the table is when one does welcoming of guests at one's table, and the charity which is associated with the table. And now charity doesn't only mean alms for the poor. Charity means doing a good deed for someone. A guest could be a wealthy person who doesn't have where to eat. He's not in his place. He's not in his milieu. So but it's still called charity because tzedakah means to do the right thing. And there it comes with a trouble and a bother, etc. But it's also, this is at the forefront. This is what our father Abraham taught us and did by example. And as we see many stories throughout the ages, this is what held us as a community, it's kept us, and it's unfortunately what brought about tragic things when that was lacking. So it's a cornerstone of any community and of the whole Yiddishkeit. But we see here why it is. It brings about the atonement. And like we learned in the Gemara Brachas that we mentioned earlier, this is the Gemara again on 55 on Nun Hey. This that we say that the table of a person atones for him like the altar, not stuck, it's because of the charity. Now, when a pauper and a poor person comes to the home, he needs a handout, and needs something, you give him something. So that's important. Now, I was going to make a connection here. Or a person, a wayfarer, can be invited in and to eat at the table. It's also charity, like we mentioned. But now that Rebbe explains more, he says, but we could also explain this according to a different Gemara. That Gabi Mailis had tzedakah the Isha. The Gemara says there the advantage of the charity that the woman gives. And this is in the traditional home. So the Gemara spells it out, and here the Rebbe brings it in the Maimer. Number one, the woman is home. She's there in the house. And she gives a loaf of bread to the poor person. She doesn't write him a check. She gives him food. Now he's talking about a starving person. Think about back in the day, and it could happen nowadays too. And he benefits right away. He doesn't have to go cash the check or buy a sandwich and go eat something and find something else to eat. He has ready-made food. He's ready to go. The husband, he just has money. He gives him money. Now go get yourself something to eat, right? Now, of course, yes, I hear all the questions here. What if the woman gives money? What if the man gives food? Good. But you get the nuance here. And the Rebbe was even going to address it, by the way, and in a certain part of that. That's the charity of the table, the Rebbe says. And that everyone is involved, man and woman, the whole family, whoever has the table. The table means that you invite someone to sit at your table. No one's giving you money. It's not money. It's food. Here, have a meal. Join us for a meal. Have a meal even if we already ate lunch. Here. Veheyeesem came, even more so, the gambit stuck at the Isha. Now, even the woman, maybe the woman will also give him some raw meat or wheat that he's going to have to grind to flour, make into bread. That'll need some work, right? But so again, the Rebbe asks this question that you're thinking of, that maybe the woman also could just do ingredients. She can cook something, right? But once it's that stuck of the table, that's the ultimate. That's what the Rebbe is pointing out, because we have all these questions on that Gemara. Of course, in that circumstance, where the husband's not home and the woman has food and she gives him, that was charity. But it could happen that it's not. It could be she only has the ingredients. I didn't cook yet. I don't know. I'm busy here. Whatever. Here, knock yourself out. Make a barbecue somewhere, right? But when you invite them to the table, there is the ultimate charity. There, the person who's hungry is eating. So at the table, everything is ready for the meal. So now we understand why the advantages of charity at the table. The charity is also you're sharing the bread. It's the bread that's of the person that's eating at the table. He has also the fulfillment of the verse in Proverbs that says that somebody who has a good eye is blessed because he gives from his bread to the impoverished. So there's that advantage too. You're sharing the meal. Milach meidavke, and it's from his food that's already ready to go. So the Rebbe is all pointing out that the table has this idea of ultimate in atonement and bring this about. But now we're going to go to the next stage. Now, that was the level of the people, the kohen and or the owners of the korban that they ate. Now, when the Mizbeach eats, that's the idea of Torah. The Torah is the wisdom and the will of the Holy One, blessed be He. Therefore, it's called my bread for my fire offering. And like the verse says also in Proverbs. And now this is an important word that I think the etymology here is important. And we don't have in the English language a proper translation for lachmu. Lechem is bread. Everyone knows that. Lachmu means get breaded, right? But it doesn't mean bread like breaded chicken or breaded something else. It means the verb of doing bread. We just look at bread as a noun. So lechu lachmu belachmi. Get your satiation of bread with my bread. Now, the word for war also has the word milchama, is the same lamed ches mem. So there's a relationship there. There's the hard work, there's the battle that it takes to bring about the bread. Now, what's my bread? God says, whatever it is. The Torah and God, is the Holy One, blessed be He, is one. Now, when you study Torah, when you eat, and the Torah is mimicking this idea that we have Torah associated with this, it becomes flesh and blood of the person, kaviyachol, so to speak. In addition to what it brings, what the Chassidic brings in the name of that book, Telas Yaakov, the Kedosheem b'karbonos Yisroel b'may modam keirim b'may sebereishis. Just like he explains there that he had also in the karbonos, where was Torah involved? So if you look at the Gemara explains. And we said it recently in Pesach, we say that we ask God to return the Koyanim to their service and the Leviim to their song and praise, and Yisroel, Veheyeesem, Israel to their purchase, so to speak. They were what's called Anshe Maimed. There was a representative of all of Israel that had to fast during the week. Each one had a turn of a week. They were a group from representing all of the tribes, etc. And they also, when they were there in the temple, they would read different passages of Torah, and included in the passages is the creation, the passages of creation, the Anshe Maimed, and they had to be there, present, because the karbonos was for everybody. So there had to be representation of Kohen, Levi, and Yisroel in the Beis Hamikdash. So they're called the Anshe Maimed. So the Kedosheem b'karbonos Yisroel b'ma'amodam koyri b'may sebereishis shezehu inyan limud haTorah, which is the idea of also Torah study, because they're reading the words of Torah the way creation is written in Torah. These are the 10 utterances which are in the Torah, with which the world was created. And indeed, the sages taught us regarding this, that God looked in the Torah and created the world. Now also, when one has a meal at the table of mankind, we set up words of Torah to be said at the meal. You have to say Advar Torah. There has to be words of Torah spoken at the meal. That's in addition to the washing and the benching that we talked about earlier. And that is similar to the people who that it was their week. Maimed means literally standing, that they stood by, that they read the creation from Torah. And more than that, the Torah in and of itself is like an offering, and like the Mizbeach's eating. Just like the Maharsha brings in his commentary on the parts of the Gemara that are talking, what are called Agadata, that are the lore. Mehamishna Davos Peri Gimel, he brings it from the Mishnah in the Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 3, Hanil B'Shabbos Zu, which we're going to be reading on this Shabbos, this coming Shabbos. Mishnah Gimel, the third Mishnah of the chapter, Sha'idei She'emer Divrei Torah HaShulchan, Aidei Zeh Nikra Zeh HaShulchan Asher Lifnei Havaya. The Mishnah says that, if you say Torah at the table, so then it's the fulfillment of that. This is the table, the same verse that we said earlier from Ezekiel. This is the table which is before God. Shahum is Be'ach Kanal. That's the altar. Like the Mishnah says, 3 people sat at a table and didn't say words of Torah, etc. And the Rebbe doesn't want to say what it says there in the Mishnah. So therefore, I don't think it's proper for us to say. But everyone could look it up and see what the Mishnah says there, and see what it's as if it was happening. But the Rebbe reads the continuation here. But if 3 people sat on one table and did say words of Torah, it's as if they ate from the table of the omnipresent. And he brings this verse like it says, and he spoke to me saying, this is the table before God. That we explained earlier, that generally speaking, the table of man is the idea of the refinement, serving God and refining the world Shabbat in the world Shabbat, which is done through charity and Torah. We could also understand why this is specifically referred to as the table. This is not understood. First of all, you could eat without a table, right? Right? You can eat on the run. You can eat in the car. You can eat something. So let's see what it says here. Number 1, it doesn't have to say the table atones. It's to say the meal atones. Because when you eat, you could do all those stages. You could eat kosher, you could say a bracha, you could say Torah, you could wash, bench, and everything, and not sit at a table. Even if you sit in a chair, even if you sit in your car, and if you sit in a park bench. What is the table specifically? And again, why does it say 3 that sat and ate in one table? Why 3? Why not more or less? Not like it says, the Mishnah over there says if 2 people are sitting, and there's a discussion there if they say Torah or not. And there's also this friendship. Like it's explained in that Maimer, this idea of tzedakah and Torah is alluded to specifically in the word shulchan. And now we're going to get a little bit into this etymology. We spoke before the etymology of lechem, lamed chesme, but now we're going to talk about shulchan. Now, we know shulchan means table. We know there's a famous concept called shlichut, a mission, or to send, lishloyach, to send something, all has this root, shin lamed ches. So why does where does the table come into that etymology here? The verse there, it's in, first of all, there's another typo here. It says in footnote 35, it says the Chem Yud Daled Aleph. It should say Yud Aleph. And there it's in verse Yud Aleph, and then I was going to bring also, in 2 footnotes later, verse 17, Yud Zayin, which is correct. So there's a discussion there about when they were coming back, they were rebuilding the wall, there were the enemies there, etc., and how they were protected. You could look there in chapter 4 in Nehemiah for the details. But there it says, uses the word that when they were working hard to rebuild the wall and to protect themselves from their enemies. So on one hand they would have the spade, on the other hand they had their weapon. The weapon is referred to as the shalach, and to the extent that he says there in the verse that we always had it with us, even no matter what, even if we went to get water, whatever it was. So there, the word shalach is used as something that would be a weapon. This is the connection to the serving God through eating. Like the Zohar says, Nama Pumchar Belechel. The Zohar says that a loaf of bread on the edge of a sword to be eaten. Now, in other words, to eat properly for the right purpose is also a battle. One of the explanations is that you have to have in mind that you're eating for the sake of serving God, not necessarily for the pleasure of what you're deriving from this food, unless it's Shabbos. And Shabbos, you have to have the pleasure just because it's Shabbos, not because you really enjoy it, but because you're enjoying it because it's Shabbos. You're allowing yourself the pleasure. This is a battle in and of itself. Therefore, it's a battle, it's a war. The war of refinement, it's a macholim, to refine the food. Like we mentioned earlier, sometimes if the eating it can bring about being in a sinful situation. Now here the Rebbe says what the pshat here, the commentaries there in Nehemiah have various ways that they learn the word, and there it actually has in the verse the idea of hafshit means to separate, not miloshin perushim, but like when you take off the skin of an animal, it's called the hafshit, to removal, and therefore here he's talking about removal of the material part and focus on the spiritual part. Although there in that verse we also have this a word with shluchai, which also means the weapon there too. But it's interesting because at the beginning of the verse it says this idea of, he says we didn't separate our clothing from ourselves from anything that we did, including the weapon. So there's different ways to look at it. But the Rebbe learns the pshat that it's associated with this idea of separation too. So I think the Rebbe is taking this 2 steps further. Ki teuchen, and if I'm mistaken, the good Lord will forgive. Ki teuchen avodasu hi lahafshit haruchnis me'agashmis. The Rebbe explains it more. The whole idea is to separate the spiritual from the physical, to look at the deeper purpose, to look at what it's really about. V'chein shalahu loshen shlichus. And now the Rebbe brings the third thing that this is also the idea of the mission, the Yeshleimar. Like Menachem says, you can take it to the bank. We could say, this is referring to the general purpose of the soul coming down to the lower realm. Its mission is, and that has the same word as the table, shulchan, he allows us to make a dwelling place for God on this earth. And that's why it says, and God spoke to me saying, this is the table before me. God, and Pirish Lifnei Havaya Hulamayla Misham Havaya. Before God means it's higher than God in this context. And like it says regarding the Day of Atonement, Lifnei Havaya Titoru, before God you will purify yourself. The root of purification is higher than the name of God even. So it comes from the very supernal part of God. Ki Havaya Huloshin Mehave. The name of God means to make and cause something to come into being and to continue being, and that it will always be. Mehave means to create. So that is the name of God has within it that idea of causing things to be. Which is therefore it's so that part is already the part of God that is connected to making the world be, and making the world come into formation. But Israelites, through their serving God with refinement, they have within their capability to draw down from a level which is even higher than which God is using in his involvement of the creation, to draw down this purity, this pristine level. That's what it means. The verse tells us, you shall sanctify yourselves and be holy because I am the Lord your God. There's another verse, the famous verse that says, you shall be holy because I am holy. So does that mean, so the Talmud has a discussion. It says maybe it means you should be holy just like I am holy, the same holiness as me. So the Talmud there says, because I am holy, but my holiness is higher than your holiness. But now listen to this explanation that Chassidic explains, and it's actually brought from the Moir Naim, of the great Maggid of Chernobyl, that and the Rebbe explains it in a few places, several places, that Talmud Shakdusha Shalamayla He Mikdushaschem. The supernal holiness, the high holiness of God, comes from your sanctifying yourself, so to speak, through you making yourselves holy. And it's similar to what the Medrash says on the verse that you should be holy. If you will sanctify yourselves, I will consider it. I will consider it for you as if you have sanctified me. Hainu, so the Maggid says, so to speak, we draw holiness to the supernal one, so to speak, in the supernal realms. So that my Kedusha is higher than your Kedusha because we're bringing it from our Kedusha. But the is a nifl. How did that happen? They have the shulchan through serving God on the table. Shezek Hil is based on that's talk of a Torah that includes both ideas of charity and Torah. These two things, these two specific mitzvahs, charity and Torah, make the person a partner with the Holy One, blessed be He, in the creation. Yes, it all came in more than that. We are able to draw down from even higher than God's creation of canal. And like we said earlier, my supernal holiness is through the holiness in the lower realms. This is the idea before Lifnei Havaya. Before God means higher than the name of God. This primarily is drawn down through the Torah. The Israelites are able to bring Navaleh and something new in Torah, and that's to increase in a great way, and the Torah is unlimited. And through this they affect a new part of Torah retroactively. The Torah that was given at Sinai, even though we figured out a new idea within the Torah, but it's as if it was already alluded to at Sinai. This is connected also to the beginning of the ethics of the fathers. Moses received the Torah at Sinai. Because it says everything that a good student, a sharp student, will come up with and a new understanding in Torah, it was all already given to Moses at Sinai, even though it wasn't revealed till later, till this person figured it out. The revelation of this that was given to Moses, specifically through that sharp student that is able to reveal this and figure this out. The Rebbe explains this elsewhere at length. This is the idea of Yisroel, that we are able to then influence and add in the Torah in this sense. Get out the yellow highlighters, please. Here the Rebbe is giving us the strength and the inspiration. This is how it is in every single individual Israelite. Even somebody who is not able to come up with new things in Torah. Yisroel, Israel, stands for an acronym. There are 600,000 letters in the Torah. Hainu shekol echad. Everyone has a corresponding letter in the Torah. If that's the case, that means everybody has a connection to the whole Torah. Because the Torah is one thing in one essence. And here the Rebbe says, like the Baal Shem Tov taught, that there's something that's essential, it's an essence. If you just touch a little bit, you have the whole thing, because it's not parts, it's all of it. So, if you grab just a little bit, you have everything. This is what we say. This also in the davening that our sages taught. That it's they're expounding on the verse in Isaiah that all of your children are the ones who study the godly matters, and much peace into your children. Shekol banayach kol bnei Yisroel. That means every one of your children, all the children of Israel. Hem limudei talmidei havaya. They are all students of God. What we expound on is boinoich and bonoich, that they would build the Torah also. That the Rebbe is not bringing that here. That's just something which most are familiar with. This is going to be in a revealed sense in the future to come when Mashiach comes. That it brings two famous prophecies here, like it says in Isaiah. The kings will be your wet nurses, and their officers will be the wet nurses, those that help you, like a nanny, so to speak. And wet nurse. When Mashiach comes, there won't be war, and there won't be jealousy, and there won't be competition. Remember, this is just a few weeks after the first Siyum HaRambam, when the Rebbe had expounded on this, the last halacha in Rambam. And it will be, the glory of God will be then revealed, and all flesh will be able to see this, so everyone will see it. So then we'll have the fulfillment of the prophecy which is in Tzfanya, that and then I will turn to all of the nations with in a clear tongue, in a clear language. Likri kulam b'shem havaya. They all call out in the name of God. La'avdei shechem echad, and they all serve Him in one flank, all one thing. V'hainu degam hoz yihiu musa'elim. That means that there will be nations of the world. Al makom hakim heim yihiu b'chinas zarim utfeilim. But they will be connected to you, but not part. They will still be Gentile in that sense, and therefore secondary to this other mission. Indeed, like the verse says specifically in Isaiah 61, and strangers will get up and they will pasture your sheep. And then Israel will be left to the primary task. Being a revealed sense. That way Israel is the firstborn. God says, my firstborn, Yisroel, heim boni, that's already in Exodus. Yisroel, heim bonim lamokim, like it says in Ethics of the Fathers, again in the 3rd chapter, which we'll read this coming week, that Israel is our children of the omnipresent. Hainu shehem chelik elikami mal mamish, they are an actual part of God from above in a specific, exact format. Yisroel came to more than that. Shem bechinas yoydish shebemokim hamoydish mamish. Here, if somebody's a child, so then they inherit. So somebody who inherits is exactly, the Talmud gives this, and it's explained here by the Rogachover, that means that you're exactly in the spot of the one that gave over the inheritance. So that means that we're, in that sense, if you understand the context that the Rebbe is saying here, that we're bonim lamokim, that a child is a yoidish, an inheritor. Inheritor is the place of the one who gives the inheritance. Which is, this is also in a Talmudic discussion, that's even more than the connection of father and son, because it's already with the task of ownership, and Talmudically we understand this as such, and now this will all happen especially with the true full redemption. Mashiach came through our righteous Mashiach, speedily nowadays actually so. Chaim.